Hi, today we're going to be making cinnamon scrolls. So the aim of today's lesson will be to learn about using yeast to make a sweet bread. The first thing that you're going to do is set your oven. It's going to be 200 degrees Celsius. Okay, so now we get to activate our yeast. So the first thing we're going to do is take 2 teaspoons of dried yeast. I keep my dried yeast in the fridge so that it stays fresh for a long time. Now, to activate yeast, it means that we're taking it from its dormant state, being dried, and we're going to rehydrate it with some warm water and sugar in order for it to start to come back to life and reproduce. So we've got 2 tablespoons of sugar and 2 teaspoons of dried yeast. We then need warm water. It needs to be warm, so it needs to be a lukewarm warm temperature. You can stick your finger in to check the temperature and make sure that it's not too cold, but also not boiling hot, because that would kill the yeast. So our warm water will be added to a small bowl, and you can give it a small stir. And we need to let that sit aside for around about 10 minutes to activate. So in order for that dried yeast to activate, we're going to see small bubbles occurring. So we can sit that aside for 10 minutes and we'll come back to it and check. While we're waiting for our yeast to activate, we can start to make our dough mixture. So we're going to be using the yeast today as our leavening agent. Now, a leavening agent is something that helps a flour mixture to rise by adding gases. We've got 3 different leavening agents that we could possibly use, and we've been using them over the last couple of weeks. So yeast is one, and that's bacterial base. And the other ones that we have are a physical one. So that one we can use also in this recipe, the addition of air. So just by sifting flour, that's adding air to our mixture. So I'm going to add 2 cups of flour to get us started. The other physical leavening agent that we've used recently is beating butter and sugar. So we made the Greek biscuits, so we beat the butter and sugar to incorporate air and volume to the mixture. So there are 2 other ways that you can help a mixture to rise. And then last week we made Anzac biscuits, and that is our chemical leavening agent of bicarb soda. So that created that reaction of the carbon dioxide bubbles, helping our Anzac biscuits to rise. So I've got my 2 cups of flour and half a teaspoon of salt in my large mixing bowl. And the next step I need to do is take 1 egg, crack it, lightly whisk that with a fork. And then I'm going to add that to 40 grams of melted butter. So today I've measured my 40 grams and I've melted it in the microwave. And I'm going to incorporate my 2 liquid ingredients together. So I've got melted butter and I've got an egg, and I'll give that all a whisk with the fork. So now I'm ready with my wet ingredients, my dry ingredients, and I'm waiting for my yeast to be activated. So it's been 10 minutes now, and you can see that my yeast has become activated because it's a little bit foamy and bubbly on top. So what I'm going to do now is mix my salt and my flour together and create a small well in the center. I'm going to pour my yeast mixture into that. And I'm going to pour in my egg and butter mixture as well. Now I'm going to stir this until it comes together into a dough. So they say that the yeast being added to bread was first discovered by an Egyptian baker, that one day he made his own dough of flour and water, and he mixed that dough and put it together and then left it aside. And while the dough was sitting there, some yeast from the air came along and landed on the dough. that yeast then started to feed off the sugars that was in the dough, and it started to ferment. And this means that it produced carbon dioxide, little bubbles, so that it could increase in volume, and also some ethanol, which is the other side product of fermentation. So that was the very first time that yeast was used in a dough, and since then they've found that that made the dough light and fluffy, and it's become the standard way to make bread. So I'm going to now start to knead this dough. So we're going to fold it in half and push with the palm of our hand. We can use the palm of our hand because it's nice and warm, and we want to keep that warm environment for the yeast to grow. So we can just knead that for a few minutes until it's nice and elastic. So we want to work the gluten, which is the proteins that are in the flour, so that they stretch and become nice and elastic. So I'm going to keep kneading it for a little while. So now I've been kneading my dough for around 5 minutes, and it's nice and smooth and elastic. So I'm going to place it back into a clean bowl. And then I'm going to place some glad wrap over the top, and I'm going to leave this to proof for around about 20 minutes. Now this means that we are looking for the dough to double in size. So it needs to be in a nice warm environment. So you could put it in front of a warm sunny window or the heater, or near the oven. So when we're proofing a dough, we are looking for it to increase in volume, and that's going to have lots of carbon dioxide and air that's growing inside of it. So I'll do that now. I'll come back. While we're waiting for our dough to proof, I'm going to start to make the filling. So I've got 60 grams of butter, and I've softened it slightly, just a little bit in the microwave, but I didn't want to melt it. So really for about 10 or 20 seconds. You need to mix in 2 tablespoons of brown sugar and a tablespoon of cinnamon. So this is going to make a little paste that then we will spread over our cinnamon dough. So just using the back of your spoon, you can push it against the side of the bowl. So we don't want to melted butter. It needs to have a bit of texture to it. So that might take you a little bit of time until that's all incorporated together. So your mixture will end up looking a bit like icing really, so it's smooth and creamy. So we can just leave that aside, and then the second thing you can do while you're waiting for your dough to proof is to line your baking tray with baking paper. So I've left my dough for around 15 to 20 minutes to double in size, and you can see that it's increased in volume. So I'm going to remove it from the bowl now and pop it onto a lightly floured surface. So you could give it a little knead at this point, but I'm going to go straight into rolling it. So just a little bit of flour so that my rolling pin does not stick. So we want to roll this out, and I'm going to move it so it doesn't stick to the bench into a rectangular shape. So we're going to start from the middle of the mixture and press outwards. And we're going to aim for about 30 centimeters by 20 centimeters. So you need to keep working in an even fashion so that you don't end up with a lopsided dough. So that might be just about the right size. Nice. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is take my cinnamon and butter and sugar mixture and spread it all over the dough. So you can take the whole lot. And spread it out nice and evenly right to the very edges. You could actually try different filling with this as well. You could try doing Nutella, you could sprinkle some nuts through it, which would also be very delicious. Okay, so that's done. Now we need to roll it up. So once you've rolled up your dough, you'll then need to cut it in half right in the center, and then in half again. So now we've got quarters. Each quarter we're going to chop into thirds. Then we'll be ready to put it on the tray. Each one of these 12 pieces we're going to pick up and put onto a tray and give it a light squash with your hand. You need to space them out nicely on the tray to make sure that they don't stick to each other. Now they're going to cook in a very hot oven. We need to put bread into a hot oven so that the moisture within the bread will create steam. And that steam's going to create little air pockets in that gluten, that the protein that we've got in the dough. It's going to be captured in there, and we end up with lots of air bubbles or air pockets to make a light fluffy dough. At the same time, our yeast continues to produce carbon dioxide. So you're going to end up with very nice, light, fluffy little muffins or bread. After 10 minutes, we need to check the scrolls. They're looking good. Maybe change shelves if one's more golden than the other. And then we reduce the heat just down to 180 degrees Celsius now and cook them for an additional 5 minutes. So now you've got your cinnamon scrolls all beautiful and cooked and ready. You might like to check them a little bit earlier just to make sure they don't get too dark in colour. Enjoy!